Why has the number of adults disabled by mental illness skyrocketed since the introduction of modern psychiatric drugs? We'll deconstruct the controversial answer.
That's a really provocative question, isn't it?
It really is. A very challenging one.
And it's exactly the kind of question we love to tackle here on the Deep Dive. Today, you're embarking on a journey with us that, well, it challenges some pretty fundamental assumptions about mental health care. We're exploring a thesis suggesting our modern approach might actually be, exacerbating the very conditions it aims to treat.
It's a heavy topic, definitely.
We're going to examine Robert Whitaker's powerful and extensively researched book, Anatomy of an Epidemic. Now, this isn't just a book summary, though.
No, not at all.
Whitaker meticulously compiles research to argue that psychotropic medications, particularly antipsychotics and antidepressants, have become a primary driver of chronic mental illness in modern society. But here's where we take it a step further.
We're going to critically synthesize and triangulate Whitaker's claims against a broader library of insights we've gathered. We'll explore how narratives are built, maintained, and challenged in various societal systems.
Looking at the bigger picture, the context.
Exactly. So prepare to question the stories we tell ourselves about health, about healing, and ultimately about control. Let's start by unpacking Whitaker's provocative core argument. This really forms the backbone of Act 1, the paradox of progress. The central claim of Anatomy of an Epidemic is that the widespread adoption of psychotropic drugs initially hailed, as he points out, as these magic bullets, actually correlates directly with an increase in chronic mental illness and disability, particularly here in the United States.
It's a truly unsettling paradox, isn't it?
It is. The very tools designed to help seem to be, in his view at least, making things worse on a systemic level.
It's a stark reversal of the expected outcome, absolutely. Whitaker doesn't just, suggest this casually. He lays out a methodical case that these drugs, rather than offering a cure, often transform what might have been acute, time-limited episodes of mental distress into lifelong chronic conditions.
Right.
It forces us to confront the possibility that our therapeutic interventions might be perpetuating the very epidemics they aim to combat.
And he doesn't shy away from specific examples. Let's zoom in on schizophrenia for a moment, as he does in quite a bit of detail.
Okay.
Whitaker meticulously traces how, prior to the widespread use of antipsychotics, outcomes for individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia, while undeniably challenging, no one's saying it wasn't serious,
Of course not.
but outcomes often included significant periods of recovery. Many people experience psychotic episodes, yes, but a substantial number would eventually improve, return to work, or live independently. It wasn't always a life sentence, as we sometimes think of it now.
That's a crucial point. It's often overlooked in the current narrative. The historical record, as Whitaker presents it, shows a different natural history of the disorder. People might experience an acute break, but there was a significant capacity for spontaneous remission or recovery with supportive, non-pharmacological interventions.
Exactly. But then came the introduction of drugs like Thorazine in the mid-20th century. This was hailed as a monumental breakthrough, right? The first truly effective antipsychotic.
That was the story, yes. A revolution in care.
Yet, Whitaker presents data suggesting that after its widespread adoption, disability rates for schizophrenia increased dramatically. It wasn't just that more people were diagnosed, more people were becoming chronically ill and unable to function, relying on disability benefits.
And that's where the paradox truly manifests. While early discharge rates from hospitals appeared, positive people were no longer just warehoused, which was good.
Sure.
It frequently led to what Whitaker terms a revolving door syndrome. Patients would be released, often on medication, only to relapse, be readmitted, stabilized, released again, and so on.
So not really recovery, just management.
Exactly. This created a new kind of chronicity, one tied to the continuous cycle of medication and hospitalization, rather than sustained recovery.
And he substantiates this with data, doesn't he? Pointing to a significant rise in disability and unemployment among individuals with schizophrenia after these drugs became commonplace.
Yes, he does. His argument is that the natural history of the disorder itself appears to have worsened over time, not improved, and that this worsening happened in lockstep with the increased reliance on pharmaceutical interventions.
It's a bold claim, really asking us to consider that the intervention might be changing the illness for the worse.
It certainly challenges the intuitive understanding of medical progress, doesn't it? We expect innovations lead to better outcomes, fewer disabilities, greater independence. Whitaker, by meticulously tracing these epidemiological shifts, forces us to question that assumption in the context of psychiatric care.
Right. And while Anatomy of an Epidemic explicitly details this for schizophrenia, the very title of the book, Anatomy of an Epidemic, suggests a similar argument for other conditions, too.
The implication is broader.
He implies that the astonishing rise of mental illness in America, the explosion of diagnoses like depression, anxiety, ADHD, has a comparable link to the widespread use of antidepressants and other psychotropic medications.
Yeah, the argument seems to be systemic.
The broader implication is that these drugs play a similar role in fostering the chronicity of depression and other mood disorders, leading to a rise in long-term disability for these conditions as well.
It's a consistent pattern that he argues emerges across diagnostic categories. The narrative isn't just about one illness or one class of drugs, but about a whole systemic approach that, when viewed through the lens of long-term outcomes, seems to produce more chronic illness rather than less.
So this brings us to a stark contrast that Whitaker draws: the magic bullet narrative versus the actual long-term reality. The initial hopes for early psychiatric drugs were genuinely sky-high. Can you describe that initial narrative a bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about the messaging around early drugs like Thorazine, or later, the SSRIs for depression. They were promoted as revolutionary. The idea was that they targeted a specific biological imbalance, corrected it, and offered a path to normalcy, even a cure for conditions that were previously seen as intractable.
Like fixing a broken machine.
Pretty much. This magic bullet perception wasn't just an internal medical belief. It was aggressively marketed, widely promoted in the media, and became a cornerstone of public understanding. It offered hope, and that hope was incredibly powerful.
And it still resonates today, doesn't it? That idea of a quick pharmaceutical fix for complex emotional and psychological distress.
Very much so.
But Whitaker systematically contrasts this optimistic narrative with a deep dive into long-term outcome studies. He argues these studies reveal a very different picture, suggesting that non-drug treatments or even drug-free approaches often yield better long-term results for conditions like schizophrenia. That's a huge claim.
It is, and it's backed by significant research that often gets overlooked or perhaps downplayed. He heavily references studies like the Harrow long-term study, for instance.
Okay, what did that show?
This groundbreaking research, spanning decades, actually indicated that individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia had better outcomes off medication over extended periods compared to those on continuous drug treatment.
Better outcomes off medication.
Yes, fewer relapses, better social functioning in the long run. This directly challenges a core assumption about the necessity of lifelong medication for these conditions.
So if the long-term studies showed better outcomes for people not on continuous medication, why isn't this information more widely discussed? I mean, that seems critical. And were there any alternatives that showed promise that got sidelined?
Excellent question. And yes, according to Whitaker. He isn't just pointing out a problem. He highlights alternative models that demonstrated efficacy but were largely ignored or marginalized. He points to examples like non-drug treatment approaches in Lapland.
Lapland, really?
Yes, focusing on family support, community integration, and early intervention without relying heavily on medication. And these approaches yielded remarkably superior long-term results compared to standard care elsewhere.
That's a truly different model. Psychosocial support at the forefront.
Exactly. And then there's the Soteria project, a truly pioneering effort by psychiatrist Lauren Mosher back in the 1970s.
I've heard of that one.
It was an early, remarkably successful non-drug alternative to traditional psychiatric hospitalization for acute psychosis. It basically provided a supportive, non-coercive, home-like environment for individuals experiencing their first psychotic break.
And it worked.
It demonstrated that drug-free models were not only possible but effective. Yet despite its success, the Soteria project was largely sidelined, lost funding, and ultimately faded in favor of the burgeoning pharmaceutical approach.
Wow.
It really begs the question, why were these alternatives not pursued more widely if their outcomes were so promising?
It sounds like a critical fork in the road for mental health care, where one path, the drug-centric one, became dominant despite evidence supporting other routes. Now, Whitaker also proposes specific mechanisms by which these drugs could actually be causing harm, beyond just masking symptoms. This is where it gets particularly unsettling.
Yes, this is a crucial part of his argument.
One of the most alarming is the concept he discusses called supersensitivity psychosis. Can you explain what that means?
This is a key mechanism Whitaker describes, and it's quite disturbing because it implicates the drugs themselves in potentially worsening the illness over time. The idea of supersensitivity psychosis suggests that the brain, upon long-term exposure to antipsychotics, which block dopamine receptors, well, the brain adapts. It tries to compensate by increasing the number and sensitivity of its dopamine receptors.
So it's like the brain turns up the volume trying to hear the dopamine signal better when the drug is making everything quiet?
Precisely. It's a classic homeostatic response, the brain trying to maintain balance. But the consequence is that when the medication is reduced or stopped, or perhaps even when the dose stays the same, but the brain's adaptation progresses, this heightened sensitivity can lead to more severe and frequent psychotic episodes than the person might have experienced initially before they even started medication.
Whoa.
Essentially, Whitaker argues the drugs themselves can induce a more chronic and severe form of the illness they are meant to treat, creating a physiological dependency that makes it incredibly difficult for individuals to ever get off them without experiencing significant withdrawal and rebound symptoms.
That's a truly chilling thought, that the very treatment could make you more vulnerable to the illness in the long run. What other mechanisms does he point to?
Beyond that, he discusses other debilitating side effects that contribute to disability and poor outcomes. One widely recognized example is tardive dyskinesia.
The involuntary movements.
Yes, exactly. An involuntary movement disorder that can be a direct and often permanent consequence of long-term antipsychotic use. It profoundly impacts a person's quality of life and physical autonomy, visibly marking the person as having a chronic condition.
And it's irreversible in many cases, isn't it?
Unfortunately, yes, often. And then there are claims about cognitive impairment. Whitaker details how cognitive impairment in schizophrenia patients might be exacerbated or directly linked to drug treatment, further contributing to a decline in overall functioning. This makes it harder for individuals to live independently, go back to school, or hold a job.
So it's not just about managing acute symptoms in the moment, but the broader impact on a person's life capabilities and potential.
Exactly. It's a holistic argument about how the drugs affect not just the brain's chemistry, but a person's entire trajectory, their ability to function and thrive long term.
And finally, Whitaker isn't shy about alleging the suppression of findings and the hiding of evidence that challenged this drug-centric model. This is where the story goes beyond just pharmacology and into the realm of power, influence, and narrative control.
He definitely goes there. He highlights how early critics and researchers, figures like Melvin Sapshin and Lauren Mosher, remember Mosher's Soteria project we just discussed?
Yes.
Their theories of causation and treatment approaches offered alternatives, but they were systematically marginalized, he argues. Their work was pushed to the periphery, their funding often cut, making it harder for alternative perspectives to gain traction in the mainstream medical establishment. It's a pattern of dissent being actively quieted, according to his research.
And he also alludes to instances where evidence was allegedly hidden or downplayed, particularly with newer drugs.
Right. He discusses how newer, so-called atypical antipsychotics like risperidone were heavily marketed, presented as breakthroughs despite lingering questions about their long-term outcomes and safety profiles, or perhaps even showing less than stellar efficacy compared to older, cheaper drugs in some independent studies. This suggests an early and potentially consistent pattern of corporate interests overriding full transparency, shaping the accepted narrative about mental health care and influencing what information reaches both clinicians and the public.
It points to a potential conflict, doesn't it? Between the scientific pursuit of truth and the commercial imperative of profit?
Whitaker's work strongly suggests that, perhaps too often, the latter has taken precedence, leading to a system where certain narratives are amplified while others, particularly those questioning the long-term use of medications, are suppressed or ignored. Okay, that's a lot to process from Act 1. Whitaker presents this incredibly bold and challenging thesis, asserting that the very interventions meant to alleviate mental suffering might actually be perpetuating it. It's a claim that, if true, has massive implications for how we understand and approach mental health.
Absolutely.
But it also raises an important question. How could such a system become so entrenched, so widely accepted, if there's evidence suggesting it's problematic? Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. We can triangulate these claims by looking at the broader mechanisms of control and narrative shaping that exist in various societal systems.
Right, taking a wider view.
Exactly. This isn't just about medicine. It's about how power operates, how information flows, and how our perceptions can be, well, engineered.
That's a critical lens because it suggests that the issues Whitaker uncovers might not be unique to psychiatry, but perhaps symptoms of larger societal forces at play. So where do we start with these mechanisms of control?
Well, when we talk about how a system like this could become so entrenched, we absolutely have to start with the economic imperative: profit, lobbying, and market dominance. Whitaker's claims resonate deeply with historical instances where corporate profit was blatantly prioritized over human well-being. We've seen this starkly in cases like the Bayer HIV blood scandal.
The Bayer scandal was horrific, wasn't it? For listeners who might not be familiar, can you quickly remind us what happened there? It seems relevant.
It was indeed, and highly relevant to the theme of profit over safety. Back in the 1980s, Cutter Biological, which was a division of Bayer, continued to manufacture and sell HIV-contaminated factor VIII and IX concentrates. These were essential blood clotting products for hemophiliacs.
Oh, I remember this now. It was devastating.
Utterly. What's chilling is that they continued selling these contaminated products, specifically targeting less regulated markets overseas, even when they were fully aware of safer heat treatment technologies that could have decontaminated the blood products and prevented infection.
They knew there was a safer way?
The documentation suggests they did. It wasn't an oversight. It was described later as a calculated decision, where the financial value of existing unheated inventory was prioritized over patient safety.
Wow. So the core insight here is that in systems driven heavily by profit, patient safety can become a secondary concern, even in areas as sensitive as medicine. And we need to be aware of those inherent pressures in mental health care, too.
Precisely. The parallel to Whitaker's argument is clear. If profit motives can drive decisions that compromise physical health so drastically, could they also influence the development, marketing, and perpetuation of psychiatric treatments, even if long-term outcomes are less than ideal or potentially harmful? It provides a chilling historical precedent for prioritizing financial gain.
And it's not just about selling existing inventory, is it? It's about shaping the entire landscape, the rules of the game. The pharmaceutical industry, like other major government contractors, invests enormous sums in lobbying.
Absolutely enormous. We see this with companies like Maximus lobbying for welfare privatization, influencing legislation, funding priorities, and regulatory oversight.
So how does this translate to the world of psychiatric drugs?
This intense lobbying effort shapes the very environment in which psychiatric drugs are approved, marketed, and prescribed. It influences research funding, what gets studied and what doesn't. It shapes clinical practice guidelines, influences continuing medical education, and even public health campaigns.
So they can essentially create the demand, or at least the framework where their products are the main solution.
If a company can influence the rules, they can help ensure their products are positioned as the primary, if not the only, acceptable answer. It's about creating and dominating a market where your product is not just an option, but the default option.
And this ties into a broader economic philosophy too, doesn't it? This idea of market solutions for everything.
It does. This also ties into the broader ideology of neoliberalism, which emphasizes market-driven individualism and often promotes healthcare itself as a commodity, something to be bought and sold.
Right.
In such a framework, solutions are frequently sought within a profit-driven model. This inherently favors drug sales, which are highly profitable over potentially less profitable, more time-intensive, holistic, or community-based interventions, like therapy, social support, or lifestyle changes.
Like the Soteria model you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. That kind of model is much harder to scale and profit from in the same way as a pill. The pervasive economization of life, as we see in things like the gig economy, where solutions become individualistic and market-based rather than systemic, reinforces this trend. You're encouraged to buy a solution, a pill, rather than demand a systemic change or explore a less commercially viable alternative. It shifts responsibility from society to the individual consumer.
So if the economic imperative is pushing these solutions, the next logical step is how demand for these products is created or amplified. This leads directly into the concept of manufacturing demand, creating an illusion of necessity.
Absolutely crucial point. If we look at the work of someone like Edward Bernays, a seminal figure in public relations, and actually Sigmund Freud's nephew.
No kidding.
Yes, he articulated the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses. Bernays viewed the public not as rational citizens, but as an irrational herd, requiring guidance from an invisible government. His techniques involve shaping public opinion through strategic communication, leveraging influential figures, emotional appeals, and simplifying complex issues.
So he was essentially the architect of modern propaganda, right? Or at least modern PR.
You could certainly say that.
Yeah.
And this framework perfectly describes how a magic bullet narrative for psychiatric drugs could be constructed and then relentlessly maintained, making these drugs seem like the only viable scientific option.
How so?
Think about it. Advertising and media constantly link consumption with desirable social outcomes, happiness, success. This easily extends to healthcare, where solutions are offered as consumer products. The relentless promotion of consumption fosters passivity and distracts from deeper systemic issues. Instead of questioning why mental distress is so prevalent or seeking non-pharmacological answers, the messaging guides us toward the idea that there's a pill for every problem, a product for every feeling. It creates a perceived need that might not have existed or been framed that way previously.
That's a powerful point. It's not just about what's offered, but how the demand for it is cultivated. This leads us directly into controlling the narrative shaping public perception and often silencing dissent. The media, of course, plays a critical role here.
A huge role. Herman and Chomsky's propaganda model, for instance, is very relevant here. It suggests that the mass media tend to support existing power structures through various structural filters.
Like what kind of filters?
Things like concentrated media ownership, dependence on advertising revenue, especially from major industries like pharma, reliance on official sources like government agencies or industry experts, and flack negative responses from powerful groups that discipline critical coverage.
Okay.
This model helps explain how critical views, like those presented by Whitaker, could be marginalized, dismissed as unscientific, or simply ignored, while narratives favorable to established medical and pharmaceutical interests are amplified and normalized. It's not necessarily a conscious conspiracy, but a structural bias embedded in how information is produced and disseminated.
And we've seen narrative framing at work in so many areas, from politics to health crises.
Exactly. Case studies like the post-9/11 war narratives show how governments and complaint media can amplify unverified claims and frame issues to manufacture consent for certain policies. Whitaker's book, by presenting a detailed counter-narrative, directly challenges such powerful framing within the medical discourse.
It's like he's trying to break that frame.
And the COVID-19 pandemic was another stark example. It revealed just how critical information control can be a matter of life and death, and how emotional triggers and distraction are used to divert public attention. This mirrors how critical questions about long-term drug effects might be overshadowed by simplified, emotionally charged narratives of quick fixes and urgent needs. It makes it really hard to focus on the nuance and the long-term data.
It's almost like a form of psychological warfare against critical thinking in a way. What's fascinating here is how these narratives exploit our own built-in cognitive biases. Our brains, as amazing as they are, have shortcuts that can be leveraged, right?
They absolutely do. The human brain is highly susceptible to numerous biases that can be leveraged consciously or unconsciously to maintain a dominant narrative. Take confirmation bias, for example.
We look for what we already believe.
Exactly. People tend to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms their existing beliefs. If the prevailing belief, reinforced by media, doctors, and maybe personal experience, is that psychiatric drugs are generally beneficial and necessary, then evidence contradicting this, like Whitaker's findings, may be dismissed, ignored, or reinterpreted to fit the existing belief. Oh, that study was flawed, or that doesn't apply to my situation.
Like yellow journalism exploited existing prejudices.
Precisely. It told people what they already believed or wanted to hear, making it easier to accept. So if you already believe that a pill is the best answer, you're more likely to accept stories of its success and dismiss stories of its failure or harm.
Then there's the availability heuristic. How does that play in?
Well, when the public is constantly bombarded with dramatic stories of psychiatric drug success, often focusing on short-term improvements, as Whitaker suggests.
Which make for better stories.
Right. These positive outcomes become highly available in public consciousness. They're easy to recall. This leads people to overestimate the prevalence and significance of such positive outcomes, overshadowing any long-term negative data or nuanced findings that are less publicized, less dramatic. It's why you hear about the miraculous turnaround, but rarely about the decade-long struggle to taper off medication or the persistence of side effects.
And then there's the urgency factor. Fear can really shut down our rational brain, can't it? Especially when it comes to health.
Absolutely. Urgency and fear of loss are potent psychological tools. Think about sales tactics like only 3 left. They hijack thinking, replacing calm rationality with frantic impulsiveness. This mirrors how the fear of mental illness, the fear of becoming severely ill, the fear of relapse, or the fear of not treating it aggressively with medication can override critical questioning of established protocols.
Get help now. Don't ask too many questions later.
Sort of. The perceived urgency of getting better now can shut down deeper inquiry into long-term consequences, potential harms of the treatment itself, or alternative paths that might take longer.
So we're driven by fear and by the immediate emotional response rather than a thoughtful long-term assessment. And if everyone around you seems to be doing something, taking these medications, it makes it even harder to question it.
That's where social proof comes in. Hugely powerful. The idea that everyone does it or that trusted others are adopting a particular solution can lead to compliance, quieting rebellion, and making personal integrity or questioning feel like a liability, like you're being difficult.
Right.
If experts, institutions, media, maybe even friends and family all endorse a treatment, it quickly becomes normal, universal, acceptable. It's incredibly hard to stand alone and question the consensus, especially when dealing with something as personal and often stigmatized as mental health.
And this leads us to the power of secrecy and illusion in maintaining control. It's not always about outright lies. Sometimes it's about carefully managed perception, isn't it?
Indeed. The Skull and Bones Society, that famous secret society at Yale, for instance, exemplifies how secrecy transcends mere passive concealment and becomes an active, performative strategy that itself generates power.
How so?
This cultivated mystique attracts ambitious individuals and fuels public speculation, making the group seem immensely influential, perhaps more than it actually is. This can be a metaphor for how powerful institutions in medicine might operate, guarding certain data, using specialized language, maintaining an air of authority, thereby amplifying their perceived expertise and discouraging external scrutiny. It creates an aura of "trust us, we know best."
That makes perfect sense. And then the idea of choice itself can be manipulated, as you touched on earlier.
Exactly. Presenting an illusion of choice is an incredibly effective form of control. Think of the classic blue pill or red pill scenario. It sounds like a meaningful choice, but what if both pills ultimately serve the same system, and the real choice to walk away entirely to question the system itself was never presented as an option?
Like choosing between Coke and Pepsi, maybe.
Kind of. If the only options presented to someone seeking mental health help are different psychiatric drugs or different combinations of drugs, the real choice of exploring robust alternative treatments, nutritional approaches, or even watchful waiting might be effectively hidden from view. People feel autonomous because they chose which drug, even when they're being steered down a predetermined pharmaceutical path.
This all suggests a system incredibly resistant to self-correction, even in the face of contradictory evidence like Whitaker presents. How do institutions, particularly in medicine, manage to perpetuate this? It seems like there'd be internal pressure to fix things.
Well, this raises an important question about institutional self-preservation and the psychology behind it. Our sources point out the brain's fundamental need to feel secure and avoid shame. This can lead individuals, and by extension institutions, to twist the world until it confirms your view.
So cognitive dissonance on a grand scale.
Essentially, yes. Admitting mistakes, especially systemic ones that have affected many people and formed the basis of careers and profits, can feel like death not just of the idea, but of your place in the world. This psychological dynamic helps explain why a medical paradigm, once established and heavily invested in, might be incredibly resistant to self-correction, even when faced with evidence like Whitaker presents. It's not just about individual doctors being wrong, but the potential undermining of the entire profession's authority, identity, and economic structure.
So it's a profound human tendency to rationalize and protect what's established. The psychology of evil source you mentioned is quite stark on this, how people rationalize harmful actions.
It is. That source highlights how people can commit or participate in harmful systems and sleep peacefully because their mind smooths the edges if the action fits your story or is framed as a necessity, as being for the greater good. Now, obviously, this isn't to equate standard medical practice with atrocities, but it illustrates the powerful human tendency to rationalize actions that might threaten one's self-concept or group identity. It makes it easier to overlook or downplay negative consequences if doing so protects the established narrative, we are helping people, or the professional self-image. Evidence to the contrary could be dismissed as outliers, misinterpretations, or the unfortunate cost of doing good.
And this institutional self-preservation also manifests as simple bureaucratic inertia, right? things just keep going the way they've always gone because it's easier.
Absolutely. That's a huge factor. We've seen this in organizations like the CIA, for example, where repeated failures in intelligence operations sometimes stemmed from leaders who relied on flawed intelligence or misjudged the capabilities of their enemies, believing in their own narratives rather than grounding their actions in reality.
Believing their own hype, essentially.
You could put it that way. This highlights how entrenched institutional beliefs and standard operating procedures can override objective analysis, preventing necessary adaptation and change within a system. If the core belief is that drugs are the primary and best answer for mental illness, then data suggesting otherwise might be viewed through a distorted lens or simply not prioritized for funding or dissemination. It doesn't fit the established model.
And it starts young, too, this subtle training to conform, even in education.
Yes. Finally, education itself often functions as a system of social reproduction. Our sources note that educational systems often socialize students into accepting hierarchy, authority, punctuality, and conformity, subtly discouraging radical questioning of the status quo.
The hidden curriculum.
Exactly. This hidden curriculum prepares individuals for existing roles within society and institutions, and it can apply directly to professional training, like medical school or psychiatric residencies, where challenging established norms and drug-centric protocols might be implicitly discouraged. You learn the accepted way of doing things, the standard of care, and challenging it can feel like questioning your own training, your mentors, and your entire professional identity.
Wow. That's a comprehensive look at how these systems can become so entrenched, from the economic drivers and narrative control, right down to our own psychological blind spots in institutional inertia. It paints a complex picture. So, what piece of evidence presented so far challenges your personal assumptions about mental health care the most? Let us know in the comments. We've explored Whitaker's challenging thesis and seen how deeply entrenched psychological and systemic mechanisms might allow such narratives to persist.
It's a lot to take in, really.
It is. It requires stepping back and looking at the whole system. So what does this all mean for us, for you listening? You might be wondering, okay, how do we navigate a world where information can be manipulated, where narratives are so powerful, and where even well-intentioned systems can have unintended negative consequences?
Yeah, what do you do with this information?
Right. This deep dive isn't just about critique, though. It's about empowering you to critically engage with the systems that shape your life, including, very importantly, your healthcare decisions.
It's about moving beyond passive acceptance, isn't it?
Yeah.
This systemic analysis isn't meant to demonize an entire profession, not at all. Many clinicians are doing their best within a difficult system.
Absolutely.
But it's meant to illuminate the powerful forces, economic, psychological, institutional, that shape medical practice and patient experience, often outside of individual doctors or patients' conscious awareness.
That's a crucial distinction. The first challenge, then, that emerges from all this is the very concept of informed consent in what we might call an engineered reality. As we've learned, control often masquerades as choice. When we're presented with medical options, are we truly given a full spectrum of alternatives, risks, and long-term data? Or are we experiencing what one source termed a false choice, where the real choice to walk away or try something completely different was never mentioned?
This applies directly and profoundly to patient autonomy and the concept of truly informed consent. If information about long-term outcomes, potential harms like supersensitivity psychosis, or robust non-pharmacological alternatives is obscured, downplayed, or simply under-researched due to economic incentives or institutional biases, can we truly say consent is fully informed?
That's the question.
If a doctor, perhaps well-meaning but trained primarily in a drug-centric model, only offers you a choice between drug A and drug B, are you truly consenting from a place of full knowledge, or just choosing from a limited menu that's been pre-selected for you?
And this issue is compounded by the dynamics of obedience over critical thinking within institutional settings. Morality, we often find, is presented as a list of do's and don'ts, a leash rather than a guide. In professional or institutional settings, one source notes, obedience feels more dangerous than guilt. Can you expand on what that means for a healthcare professional in this context?
It's a powerful psychological dynamic, that phrase. It suggests that even well-meaning professionals might comply with established protocols and prescribing guidelines, the standard of care, even if they harbor personal doubts about long-term efficacy or side effects for a particular patient. Why? Because the fear of deviating.
Going against the grain.
Exactly. The fear of punishment, rejection, humiliation from their peers, superiors, licensing boards, or even malpractice lawyers can feel more immediate and threatening than the potential guilt of maybe not providing the absolute best, most individualized long-term care. This pressure to conform can subtly undermine critical thinking and honest dialogue within the healthcare system itself, leading to a silence around the very questions Whitaker's book raises. It's just safer, professionally, to follow the herd.
And it can be even more insidious when manipulation comes disguised as pleasantness. I mean, we've all probably experienced this in various contexts.
Absolutely. The tactic of smiling while being negative isn't just about delivering an insult. It's about controlling your reaction to it. This observation is quite astute.
How does it apply here?
It can be seen in corporate or institutional communication. Think about how potentially harmful information or drug side effects might be presented with a reassuring, calm tone, maybe buried in fine print or rattled off quickly at the end of an ad. This delivery subtly lowers resistance, makes the bad news feel less threatening, and can make individuals complicit in their own mistreatment by nodding along or not questioning it too deeply.
Like the gentle delivery of a lengthy list of scary adverse effects on a drug commercial.
Precisely. It's designed to normalize the risk, make you less likely to question or resist.
So if we're not always given true choices, and there's immense pressure to conform, and even negative information is softened or obscured, how do we ever move towards better long-term outcomes? This takes us to the crucial discussion around systemic dependency and the burgeoning search for alternatives, often encapsulated in what we might call the tapering movement.
Right. Whitaker's focus on the long-term outcomes for mental illness implicitly highlights a societal tendency not just in medicine, but everywhere, to favor immediate symptomatic relief over addressing root causes or cultivating long-term resilience.
The quick fix.
Exactly. It's a recurring theme in modern society, where convenience and fast solutions are often prioritized, sometimes at the expense of sustainable well-being. We want the quick fix, and the system is often designed to provide it, rather than investing in deeper, more complex, and often slower pathways to healing and recovery.
And what's fascinating here is how systems can create dependency, not just medically, but financially and existentially as well.
Yes, think about it this way. Just as student loan debt or medical debt can create a kind of neo-servitude, trapping individuals in long-term obligations and limiting their autonomy.
Makes sense.
A system that inadvertently perpetuates chronic illness can create a similar kind of dependency. Whitaker's argument about drug-induced chronicity suggests a medical system that, perhaps unintentionally but effectively, fosters long-term reliance. If the drugs make conditions chronic or difficult to stop without severe relapse, then the patients remain lifelong consumers, perpetually interacting with the system. Doctors, pharmacies, insurance.
It's a very effective, if unintended, business model.
Unfortunately, yes.
That's a sobering thought. And it extends beyond just patients, doesn't it? There's a powerful metaphor in one of the sources about million-dollar slaves. Individuals compensated handsomely, yet confined by roles and expectations.
It's a brilliant metaphor for this situation. If a drug-centric paradigm creates a professional class of prescribers, rewarded with status and income for adhering to the model, and a potent class of lifelong consumers, then both groups, in a way, can be seen as operating within a kind of gilded cage. The rewards, whether professional status, income, or perceived short-term symptom relief, come at the cost of true autonomy and potentially long-term well-being or exploring other possibilities. Professionals might be well compensated, but their practice is constrained by the pharmaceutical model. Patients might get short-term relief, but their lives may become defined by medication and chronic illness, potentially missing out on deeper recovery. It's a powerful, complex trade-off.
So, given all this, it makes perfect sense that people are increasingly looking for ways out, for more autonomy, for different approaches. While our sources don't explicitly name a tapering movement, the increasing awareness of withdrawal effects and the desire for non-drug or reduced drug pathways seems like a natural extension of Whitaker's work and these broader concerns.
It absolutely is. It reflects a growing collective pushback against the perceived control of pharmaceutical dependency and the limitations of the current model. People are seeking more agency. The idea of a sovereign pathway mentioned in one source, focusing on cultivated agency and conscious navigation of deterministic influences to expand self-directed choices.
Yeah.
That philosophical framework really underpins this impulse. It's about regaining control over one's own body and mind, resisting perceived external control from medical or pharmaceutical systems, and instead seeking genuine self-authorship in health decisions. It's about taking back personal power and demanding different options.
So how do we reclaim our perceptual sovereignty in a world so adept at managing our reality, shaping our narratives? It starts, as one of our sources suggests, with what's called the conscious decolonization of narratives. What does that mean in practice?
It means actively doing the work. It requires actively identifying and dismantling the internal frameworks of ingrained beliefs we hold. This includes challenging narratives that might stem from an unquestioning acceptance of authority, medical or otherwise, or a deep-seated desire to conform.
Peeling back the layers.
Exactly. It's about peeling back the layers of what we've been taught and told about mental illness, about recovery, about medication, and about what constitutes health. It means questioning the stories that have, perhaps unconsciously, colonized our understanding of ourselves and our options.
And hand in hand with that is cultivating agency and self-authorship, right?
Yeah.
Not just deconstructing, but building something new.
Precisely. This means actively developing self-awareness, understanding our own biases, fears, hopes, and self-regulation to make deliberate choices, not just reactive ones. This applies directly to health decisions. Individuals can expand the domain of their genuine self-directed choices by understanding how their preferences might have been conditioned by marketing, social pressure, or limited information, and then moving beyond that illusion of choice we talked about.
So it's about intentionality.
Yes, it means recognizing the subtle nudges, the advertising, the social pressures, the expert pronouncements, and then intentionally choosing a path that truly aligns with your informed values and your assessment of long-term well-being, rather than simply accepting the path laid out for you by the system.
Ultimately, Whitaker's work, and our discussion today, really affirms critical inquiry itself as a path toward intellectual sovereignty.
Well said.
It's about asking better questions, noticing who gets silenced and who gets a stage, whose research gets funded, whose doesn't, and moving beyond what one of our sources calls managed nonconformity, where dissent is allowed but kept within safe boundaries.
It's about moving to a self-chosen, constructive definition of who one is and what one values. Now, this is absolutely not about rejecting all modern medicine or demonizing all drugs. That would be foolish and unproductive.
Crucial point.
It's about demanding transparency, demanding accountability, demanding better long-term research, and advocating for a holistic, patient-centered approach that genuinely prioritizes long-term well-being and recovery over just short-term solutions or corporate profit. It's about equipping ourselves as patients and citizens with the tools to navigate a complex system with greater awareness and intentionality, and to advocate for the kind of care that truly serves us individually and collectively. This deep dive has really shown us, I think, that the stories we believe about progress and healing can be incredibly complex, often hiding layers of unintended consequences and powerful systemic influences. Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic compels us to look beyond the surface, doesn't it? To ask whether our interventions truly liberate or inadvertently bind us in the long run. It really underscores the profound importance of critical thinking in every aspect of our lives, but especially when it comes to something as personal and fundamental as our mental and physical health.
Precisely. The interplay of economics, psychology, and narrative control creates this powerful ecosystem that shapes our choices and outcomes. Understanding these forces, even just becoming aware of them, is your first step towards reclaiming your autonomy, questioning established norms, and seeking genuine solutions that are aligned with your own long-term well-being.
It empowers you to ask different questions.
Exactly. You have the capacity to discern, to challenge, and to carve your own path toward health, whatever that looks like for you. So maybe the final thought is this. What if the greatest challenge isn't finding the single right answer out there, but in learning to trust your own questions, your own research, and your own intuition when navigating complex systems like healthcare? If this analysis provided a new perspective for you, subscribe for more deep dives. Next up, watch our video on the complex history of the DSM.
Delivering the collaborative call to assembly.